Hello and welcome to This Week in Property. I'm your host, Richard Swan, and on today's show, our fabulous guest is a gentleman by the name of Kush Rawal. Now, Kush, very high position. Oh dear, this man knows stuff. He is the Director of Residential Investment at Metropolitan Thames Valley. Now, that's a big area. That's a big job. That's a lot of responsibilities going on. And we're going to dive into that today. And we'll pull apart all his different experiences and opinions on things about property, about what he does, his whole organisation, and how he sees things going in the future. But first of all, Kush, good morning, sir. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Richard. And wow, what an introduction that was. Yeah, hopefully I'll live up to it.
I'm sure you will. We're already off to a winner. We've explained just before we were recording. We're matching. We've got the matching wardrobe. It's fantastic. All the signs are good. The omens are good.
Absolutely. Good taste in clothes.
Exactly, sir. Now, who is this man? You know, we're about to chat about what you do now and what the challenges and the successes and everything that you see and your team and your clients and customers and so on and so forth. We're going to get into that. But you didn't just pop out the womb and get to where you are just now. So what is your story? You know, how did your career take any twists or turns or I always wanted to do this kind of thing? Or is this a completely different field from what you imagined as a teenage boy, for example?
Yeah, so let's start with growing up, because parents were very influential in my life, as with most people. And, parents giving that career advice, you need to do something really, really credible, Kush. You need some real good career options in front of you. And this isn't at all what I imagined when I was younger. You know, you think about all those things about being working in the army or doing something completely different. And it was really by random chance that I finished university and I saw an advert in the local paper for an organisation called Thames Valley Housing.
Right.
I had no idea what it was, what it did. All I saw was that they had an entry position and it paid really, really well, being really honest with you. And turned up at the interview, did a bit of research, and I was bowled over by what the business was about, where it was heading, and the plans that they taught me through. And I started there 15 years ago as a marketing assistant. And my career has pretty much grown and blossomed off the back of that organisation. And here we are, 15 years later. We're a much bigger outfit now. Yeah. And my role has sort of blossomed as a result of the way the business has moved forward.
Fantastic. And as you say, you mentioned, I introduced you with Metropolitan Thames Valley, but as you said there, but your wee introduction summary, that's not how it started. There's been a whole merger of things to take the organisation to where it is just now. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So Thames Valley is one half of the new organisation, and founded in 1966. Two great things happened then. We obviously won the World Cup, and Thames Valley was born. And yeah, at that time, very much a local housing association working within Southwest London, providing help and support to people in that area. And 2 and a bit years ago, we came together with Metropolitan Housing, a much bigger organisation operating nationally, and Metropolitan Thames Valley was born. We're one very clear organisation with a very clear aim, and it's all about helping people to live well. And the main way we do that is by providing a home.
Yeah, exactly. The very basis of shelter, that, the most common, one of the most fundamental parts of being a human and having these things, which we can then go on and live our lives, of course. But you're given that power. A lot of your stuff with the organisation talks about powered living, giving people power, giving them, that level of, comfort and so on and so forth. And it must be a challenge. First of all, the area, it's a massive area, isn't it? You've got I think London, the Southeast, East Midlands, the East of England. I mean, it's gigantic. How does your brain even cope with trying to manage all of that?
Yeah, so it's over 134 local authority areas that we operate in.
Wow.
That is a challenge. But, we've got a housing crisis, and up and down our country, people do need our help and our support. So, part of what we want to do is concentrate and be effective in those areas. So some of that is about making sure we're operationally efficient. we can offer that opportunity in a quite holistic way.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, often when people ask me, right, so you guys house people, right? That's what you do. It is that, but when you look at life chances, you look at the way people prosper and do better in life, giving them a home is one fundamental part of it. But it's also about joining up the dots. And, all we've got to do is reflect back on the last 2 years. We look at what we've been through, and the home became our sanctuary for everything. It was a thing that everything happened in. But the intrinsic link to things like health, education, all of those things, right, coupled together, are what give people that best start in life and that opportunity to really do things and move forward with their life. And, I'll give you a little example, a little flavor of where I've come from. So I mentioned to you earlier about not having much of an idea when I started in the sector about what they do. But it wasn't the first time that sector really touched my life. And growing up, my mum and dad, they moved here from Africa. Typical immigrant story, came here with the shirt on the back, etc., etc. And at the time, they all sort of clubbed together, the whole family, and they bought a house. And there was about 20 of us living in this 5-bed house.
Wow.
Which was a challenge. I was really young. I don't have massive memories of it, but I just remember the noise and the queues for the bathroom and things like that. And it was around the age of like 3-4 years old that mum and dad found out about a local authority-run shared ownership scheme.
Right.
And they put their names in the hat for it. And we luckily were given that chance to buy that house. And really, I think that was the making of my family. And, now I reflect on it, the work I do, stuff that I'm involved in, that impact that had has taken me through to where I am today. And it's my brother likewise. And I think that's the magic of what we do. It's about genuinely providing someone with a little bit, and I hate to use this, but that leveling up, right? How do you take someone and give them that better chance in life?
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. I love how it's such a personal thing for you. There's a real connection there, a real mission there that you'll carry with you in your bones. Your whole childhood. It's not something I trained for a few years in this job, in this career. No. This is your life. This is memories, growing up, everything about it. I mean, you're already sitting here reflecting on visual things like the queues to the bathroom, auditory things like the noise in the place. I mean, that's strong stuff. And as well as those elements of growing up, am I right in thinking you and your wife then also moved on and had another personal connection with it of using it to get on the ladder yourself? Was that in the Twickenham area, I think?
I was living in Twickenham at the time. Got married, loads of future plans taking shape, and we're living with my mum and dad at the time, right? And it was great. But you get to a certain point where you think, right, you gotta do something different. And we were desperate to buy in Twickenham. But the realities of it were, we had a household income back then of about 38 grand between the wife and I, and it just wasn't going to add up.
Yeah.
And we started looking for shared ownership. Obviously, I knew quite a bit about it by that time. And we managed to find a place. It was actually in Surrey, a little bit further out.
Right.
And we bought our first home through that. And interestingly, something that I find really quite reassuring, when I look across my team, there's about 80 of the guys across the country.
Right.
At least 10% of those guys have bought their first home through shared ownership. I think that's a real marker, is where we're living and breathing it, and we're believing in it to the extent where we'll trust our family's future and prosperity through that. I think that's quite a marker for the product in itself.
Yeah, it really is. It's not something you've just learned from a book or you've picked up at a training course. You know it because you've lived through it. You can see all the ins and outs of it all. That's very powerful. Let's head off in that tangent, actually. Those two words, shared ownership. I'm always surprised, actually, by even some of the most long in the tooth property professionals, people in the sector, in the market, they don't fully understand it. Can you touch upon that? Just those two, those two words, shared ownership. How would you explain that to someone? How it functions, what it's there for, how it's designed, and how people can tap into it.
Absolutely. And I think part of the problem we have is the name, right? It's a 40-year-old name. It was right at the time, but I think it brings so many different connotations. You'll be surprised how often people ask you, right, so who do you have to share it with, right?
Yeah.
And so really simply, the way the product works is you if you can't afford to buy a property on the open market, you can buy a share in a home, right? So we'll look at your income, and you might be able to afford 25, 30, 40% of it, and you get a mortgage for that portion of it. For the bit you haven't bought, you pay rent. And then at any point in the future, you want to buy the rest, you come back to us, and we sell you the rest based on whatever the value is at that point in time. So as a concept, it is pretty straightforward. It's just saying you're priced out the housing market, can't buy the whole thing, buy a portion of it, and when you're ready, buy the rest. And it's a product that's been around for an amazing amount of time. As I said, 40 years it's been there. And I think when you reflect and you look at all the different government initiatives that we've had over the last 40 years, how many of those have actually stood the test of time? How many are still here?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, a lot of fads, a lot of fashions, right? Like a big campaign, let's do this thing, and then it just dwindles off,
Absolutely. But I think the strength of shared ownership is the fact that it works as a concept. It fits really neatly into the legal structures that we've got already in play. And ultimately, from our point of view, as providers of it, it's something that works for us too. So, from our perspective, it's something that we really want to see more of. And the government are saying they're really up for more. I guess the only constraint really is how many schemes can we get out there and how much planning is going to slow us down from achieving those numbers. But.
Yeah, of course. I think you've explained it perfectly. Nice, simple structures. This is it. This is a concept. And, people listening in, watching the show just now, they'll get that in their heads. How are you finding it at the coalface? How are you find, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Public, who you're trying to help? Do they get it off the back? Do you need to get that message and the concept, broadcast wider? Is it a simple thing once you've spoken to them one-on-one? And I suppose it's even simpler and much more power when you actually explain, or your team explains, listen, I did this myself. This is how I got started. How do you find all that, with people right at the very end of it all?
Yeah, so there is an awareness issue, without a doubt. Right, there was some work that Ipsos Mori did a few years back, and they looked at what's the general awareness of it. And I think only about 10% of people have even heard of it, let alone understanding what it is. So I think awareness is a really big thing. There is some work going on at the moment for a few different organisations about pooling together some resources from different organisations really to amplify that message and get it out there. We've got the government Help to Buy schemes, and they're raising the awareness of Help to Buy. So shared ownership is under that Help to Buy category. It's a different type of Help to Buy product. So the government are doing things to promote it too. But I think spot on, it's about, right, so you've heard about it. How do we then get people to understand it? Yeah. And I'm a true believer, right? Before we sign anybody up to buying one of our homes, that we've got to spend time educating them as a buyer about what it is and what it isn't. So there are complexities with the product, and very often it's balancing that thing where somebody's really excited, right? Their dreams are come true. They thought they couldn't buy, now they can, and it's about bringing them back down to earth and saying, but hang on, you need to understand how this all works. There are little nuances about it. So for example, like the rent will go up every year. It's really important that people understand that, they factor it in and make sure that they can afford it too. So a lot of what we do is about spending time with the customer and using 3 or 4 different ways of communicating the messaging. So hopefully by the end of that process, they really have a good understanding of it. And I think one of the things that we've tried to really get to is a point where we've got rid of all the jargon, right? If you think you're fresh-faced, coming into the property world, there's loads of stuff being thrown at you by your solicitor, You're being told about a lease, mortgages, all this stuff. You're like, what is all this about?
Yeah.
So one thing we committed to way back in 2017 was to look at the way that we communicate that shared ownership message and really strip it back, get rid of all the rubbish jargon and focus on a language that is really clear and simple and easy to communicate. And off the back of that, we ended up creating our shared ownership brand, which is So Resi. And So Resi is what it says on your tin. You know, it's about shared ownership. It's about having a voice for that customer and speaking to the customer about not just how we're going to get them onto the ladder, but that 10, 15, 20-year relationship that we're going to have with them while they're in the home.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you split the product into two areas there to explain it to people, you know, the rent, and that's going to go up each year. And then there was this portion that your mortgage and so on. How do you find that part of the puzzle? You know, are lenders on board? Are you always working with the same lenders over and over again? Do you leave that to the buyer to sort out themselves? How do you find that part of the puzzle?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. We pretty much introduced that concept from the get-go because, you know, as much as it's about customer, do you like the home, do you want to buy it? It's can you afford it and is this going to work financially for you? And I know that might seem a little bit like Killjoy, there's a romance kind of thing, but, you know, it's about being really upfront about the numbers and how they work. So we work with a panel of financial advisors who are solely focused on the shared ownership market. So they work with all the lenders operating in that marketplace, and they will work with the customer and they'll give that separate independent financial advice about how the mortgage works, what deals are available, and talk them through all the steps through that. But in relation to your question about how many lenders operate, pretty much all the high street lenders and all the names that people will be familiar with, and for legal reasons, I won't name any particular lenders right now, but, you know, pretty much all of the key lenders operate in this market. Right. And it's one where we're seeing, you know, some good competition. You can get a mortgage from 95% of the loan to value. So effectively, from your point of view, you need 5% of whatever share you're buying in order to access that mortgage, which again is a really powerful thing. And for a lot of people who are looking at this option, one of the biggest barriers they have is that deposit piece. You know, there was something I read recently where they're saying the average Londoner would have to save for about 10 years in order to save for a deposit for a London home.
Wow.
You know, this is where the product really comes into its own. So rather than having 150 grand, 5, 10, 15 grand will probably facilitate your purchase.
Gotcha. Now, when people are listening and they hear the concept of share, okay, so I've got the rent, I've got the mortgage, right, I've got you. I suppose the next question is going to be, how is that split then? So is that just always 50-50? It's 50% of the rent, 50% you're buying on the property? Or no, is it maybe dependent on each individual property? Or is it maybe dependent, not on the property itself, but on the council, the borough, the region? You know, what would you say to there? How can you explain that part?
Yeah, that's a really confusing question, and I hope I'll answer it as well as I can. But it really depends, right? So if you're buying a brand new home, normally they'll be available from a minimum of 25%, and you can go up to 75% to start with. And it's really about how much you can afford. So you'll sit down with us and your financial advisor. They'll look at all the numbers and they'll say, right, based on your income, this is roughly what you're looking at. If you're looking at a second-hand home, because these exist also second-hand as well, where people have bought and they're wanting to sell their share, normally that will be a fixed share. It's whatever that customer has bought, they'll be selling on. So to complicate it even further, the government are making changes, and for any new homes pretty much that come to the market from 2022 onwards, they'll be available with a minimum of a 10% share. So when you think about that, that is pretty amazing, really, because actually what that means is most people on most incomes should be able to look at this as a meaningful way of getting onto the property ladder.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It really is. It gives that hope. I suppose let me twist it the other way then, actually, because we've went with the hope and the product and the answer, the solution. These two words, shared ownership, brilliant. But they started with the problem. Another two words that you covered, housing crisis. I mean, my goodness, what is your thoughts there, your opinions there? Is it mainly coming from the simple issue of supply and demand? You're obviously covering a lot of areas, but one of them in particular, London. I mean, as soon as you say London, it's almost as if you add on another certain percentage to every single property just by saying the word London. It's incredible. Are those the main drivers of the problem? Is there anything else we should think about? And where do you see it going?
So the housing crisis, in my view, is like multiple strands of different challenge that we've got, right? And there are different issues and problems in different parts of the country. The fundamental of it is supply, right? We just don't have enough homes, affordable homes, at the right price that we can access based on the average wages in our country, right? If you want to buy a home in places as diverse as Cheshire through to parts of the southwest, that affordability conundrum and that supply issue still exists, right? And from our point of view, there's beyond that, there's another bigger issue here where we look at the most acute need and people who are in a situation where they're vulnerable, they're homeless, and they need support. There just aren't the homes available for those people.
Yeah.
And I don't, growing up, and I'm sure it'll be interesting to see what your thoughts are on this. I don't ever remember seeing as many homeless people on the streets as I do now.
Yeah.
And I think that for us as a nation really should be a matter of shame and something that we're all sort of motivated to try and do something about. Yeah. So, at one end, you've got the absolute acute need. And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got, dare I say it, a bunch of guys in grey suits telling people that you don't need to own a home, you can rent.
Yeah.
And, we look at the way our economy is structured. Don't need to go too deep, but let's go there for a sec, right? Mm-hmm. You look at the way the economy is structured. You look at the way that people pay for their post-retirement. We're so intrinsically linked to the property market that, we are creating this country where you've got people who are accessing the housing market, who are able to accumulate that wealth and that value through their property and have real good options at the post-retirement, to those who are actually paying 50-60% of their income every month into their rent. We're in this perpetual downward spiral because they can't save that money for a deposit, and actually it's getting further and further outside of their grasp. And I guess for me, that's why something like shared ownership is that ideal bridge, because it says, right, we want to get you to a point where your aspiration and your desire to buy a home can be met, and we can get it in a way that the numbers work for you and from a supply side too.
Fantastic. Somebody has to build the home. I'm thinking of this now. I'm thinking of all the different people that watch the show and follow along, all different backgrounds, some investors, some buyers, agents, professionals, you name it, developers, they're out there. How do they view this concept? What have you seen in the people you work with? Are they fully on board? Do they love, generating a scheme where they're going to build, entire estates of shared ownership properties? Or is there any pushback? They're looking for much more profits. Do they look to stay in the deal and, be part of the kind of ownership of it all? How have you seen that working with different developers?
Yeah, so the general supply side, up until a few years back, was very much geared up towards a developer would go in, get planning consent for a private site, and there would be an element of affordable that would be provided as part of that.
Yeah.
And most of the growth in this area has been through that supply route.
Right.
In the last decade, there's been more and more housing association activities saying, look, I'm going to buy a site on the open market or working in partnership with a local authority or somebody, and I will develop that and deliver it purely for affordable housing. Right. And that really helped sort of propel the supply of shared ownership in particular.
Yeah.
most developers that we work with, and we work with a wide variety, they're our partners. We're reliant on them. They get the benefit of early cash flow. They've got a guaranteed sale coming through as part of this. And I think that relationship has very much evolved and got to a better and better place over the years. I remember when I first started in this sector, it was almost a them and us kind of thing. You'd open up the developer brochure, would be that tiny little greyed out bit in the end that nobody wants to talk about.
The bit at the edge.
Absolutely. But I think where it's come to now is, and Help to Buy has been really, really powerful in doing this.
Yeah.
Most people who are buying new builds at certain price points are using some form of government assistance in order to do it.
Right.
So that in itself, I think, has been a real leveler and a relationship builder between developers and us. But from an investor point of view, and that's a really good point you raised there, because from my point of view, I think we're at a bit of an epoch. And, for the sector, the housing association sector, I think the last radical point of change of this nature was in the 70s when we got liberalized and were able to get bank funding into our operations. There's a whole move of money coming into the affordable housing space. So you've got institutional investment and private investment, both looking at affordable housing and saying, actually, there's a real rationale to come and invest in these markets. So part of that is obviously for the fact that it's a long-term venture. There are organizations there that fit that profile of being really happy with long, slow-term, patient money. But equally, you look at the current agenda that's out there, it is very much on investing in a whole range of different aspects that bring societal good as well as institutional investment value. So, we're seeing more and more of these sort of organizations getting in touch, saying, right, we're really keen to get in this marketplace. Can we work with you? How can we do things? There are some really notable examples of investment coming in this area. We've got BlackRock, who have come in quite significantly with their housing association. They've set up Sage, and then the likes of L&G, M&G, and various others are really coming in wholesale to this market.
Fantastic. It's quite an evolution in all of those fronts. You explained how things used to be, the them and us with the developers and how that's evolved, and the lenders of what that's evolved, the funding partners, investment, that's evolved. It's fantastic to see that progress. And I suppose that underpins exactly what you said at the start. This is why it's still here after all this time, after all these decades. It's fantastic. Now I'm going to take you to some dark places.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness. So your first kind of senior management role just happens to coincide with a fabulous time in the world, he says sarcastically. 2008, the big crash, things that are happening there. And of course, the second thing, we've just came out, hopefully, crossing all fingers and toes, hopefully coming out of this incredible global pandemic. How on earth do you reflect upon those big moments, and how did you get through it? How challenging has it been for you? It's with hindsight and looking back on those two big moments in your own path. How has it been for you?
Yeah, wow. Okay, I'm putting my seatbelt on now. Ready for this flight. So that was one of the most challenging times of my career to date. Looking at it, we had about 1,000 homes coming out the ground. I had sites all and up and down the country where we're seeing values in some cases drop by 25%. And it was really a conundrum where you look at it, wow, how are we going to do this? What's the answer? But I had some really good tutelage. So my predecessor was a lady called Nikki Turner. Immense amount of gratitude to her. She spent 2 years working alongside her, and she really embedded some real key sort of nuggets in my mind, just about how you approach the issue. More than not, she didn't always give the solutions, but it was about dissecting things and looking at things in a slightly different way. And one of the first things we did was say, right, okay, one of the benefits we've got is as a business, we don't just sell homes, we rent homes too. right? So there was a real opportunity there for us to innovate and think about things different. And I think the biggest lesson from that time was, right, what was a significant challenge? And, you read it one way and you look, wow, this could be the Titanic, right? But what we ended up doing was totally turning that around and becoming quite a significant opportunity. So innovation created a rent-to-buy product. And really simply, it was about going out to the consumer and saying, right, we can't sell these at the moment. Do you want to rent them for 5 years? But look, we'll allow you to buy it after a certain amount of time. And we offered that up. And here we are today. That worked incredibly successfully. The buyers were happy at the end of the process having bought the home. And from our point of view, it worked and we covered our costs. And it worked as an overall thing. But I guess the other flip part of it is from a leadership point of view, where that takes you. Because, at any point of significant challenge or crisis, or however you want to articulate that, part of it is about being really focused and appreciating that people are going to have those concerns. You've got a team there looking at this thinking, okay, does this mean that I might not have a job in a couple of months' time?
Yeah.
Where's this going to take us?
Yeah.
And I think just having that genuine understanding from this is how people are going to be feeling and this is where they're at really helps you work alongside people to get them through. And similarly, we look at the last 2 years, it's exactly that. I've had people operating on the front line in various different things that we do who weren't able to have the comfort of working from home. They were out there right the way through that pandemic, providing those vital services and doing what they needed to do. And you just got to be there for your people. You've got to roll your sleeves up now and again and be part of that solution.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really loads of great wee insights there. I love that. I love the empathy part of the puzzle, because you're right, it's such a key part of being a leader. You've got your mindset. What am I doing? How am I looking at this problem? Right? What have I got to do? But the leader's got to look outside themselves. They've got to think of their team, think of their end customers, think of their partners. What is it he's thinking? What is it she's feeling in her world? I'll try and merge into their brain. And then if I know that, if I have empathy with that, I can talk to them, I can help them, I can guide them and motivate them. And tremendous.
I guess the other thing that just reflecting, you think back to the last 2 years, there's another profound thing that happened and it affected our business. As with the rest of society, but the whole Black Lives Matter and the things that we saw emerging across in the States.
Yeah.
For us as an organization, our history from the metropolitan side of our business was very much rooted in the whole Windrush movement.
Yes.
So our founder, Molly Huggins, she's the wife of the ex-governor of Jamaica. When they came back to the UK, she went out to South London and she saw the conditions that some of the Jamaican immigrants were living in. The fact you had those signs up, and I'm not going to repeat them, but the sort of signs.
Yeah.
People didn't have access to any form of decent housing. And it took that one woman to take the view that this isn't good enough and this isn't what we stand for as a country. We've got all these people coming to help rebuild the country after the war. And she founded an organization that looked to address that. So very much rooted in our history is this this DNA, if you like, that we're going to stand up rather to certain issues that are out there that we feel we can address. And, we do that primarily through housing, but given our size and scale, we have a voice, and we want to use that voice for positive effect, for change.
Yeah, I love it. That's fantastic. Yes. I love it. Now, this is us. We're coming out the dark stuff. Let's get into the light stuff. I was going to take you there anyway, but you've done a brilliant little segue there. You must have such memories, fulfillment, little wee key moments and milestones, your whole journey, being there with all these people, helping this organisation grow. I mean, when you reflect back on that, what are some of the key moments that come up for you? Is there, for example, is it small, like there's an individual family that you remember helping, or it's bigger than that? There was a big scheme that I just didn't know if it was going to work or not, Richard, and we finally got it all over the line. What comes into your head when you look back?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that really stand out to me. So one of the customers that I helped very early doors in my career was a lady who was going through quite a significant challenge, and she was going through a divorce. She had 3 young kids, and she turned up to our offices, and she was shaking. She was shaking, and she was scared, and she had no idea what was going on, and she needed someone just to say, look, it's going to be all right, and we can try and help here. Now, I'm not saying that we solved every issue in her life, but the biggest worry that she had at that point was, look, I've got 3 kids.
Yeah.
I'm only getting 100 or K out of my divorce settlement. There's no way that I can afford to buy a house.
Yeah.
And I've got a very low income. What can I do? And at that point, we committed as a business to, right, we're going to sort this out. We're going to find her somewhere to live and give her that opportunity. And we did. We found her this amazing 3-bed flat, ground floor flat, and she moved in about 8 weeks later. I just remember going to see her after she moved in, and genuinely, from that shaking, frightened lady that we saw a few weeks back to somebody whose face was beaming from edge to edge, that smile, that just imprinted on my head. And I thought, wow, if this is the power of what we do, right, give me more. I'm loving it. And from a really selfish point of view, just it fed the emotions, and it just made everything make sense.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. You talk about fulfillment in your job, I mean, my goodness, there it is in just abundance. That's fantastic. Now listen, I want to be respectful of your time. You've given so much here. You've explained everything you do, all the different concepts and so on and so forth. Just wonderful stuff. I'm going to finally end with a deep question for yourself, because you, Kush, your personal journey, these things, these moments that you've had, growing into your role, going forward with the organisation, going through all the different challenges, seeing the fantastic successes and milestones as well that we've touched upon. What have you learned about yourself through all of this, would you say?
So I can be quite impatient. And impatience...
Is that something your team's going to back up, is it? Yes, he is.
Impatience can be a virtue at some points, depending on what you're trying to achieve, but sometimes it can be quite a constraint. And in the work we do, sometimes you do have to really sit back and wait for things to happen. So, one of the things I've done in my career is I've worked with the NHS. I'm looking at the NHS estate and saying, right, how can we help you with your key worker housing issues, right? So very often there'll be a shortage of nurses. Some will be found from some part of the world. They'll bring them over, but clearly they need somewhere to live. And we've done quite a bit of that. But very often that point to actually building those homes, it's a 4 or 5 year journey. And you've got to be all over it. You've got to show that willing. And very often it's about that persistence and commitment. And I think for me, that learning of just be more patient, like be patient, and things will happen, have been a really, really key learning point for me.
Tremendous stuff. So folks listening in, watching in just now, remember, whenever it's safe to do so, go into the show notes, get connected to this man. All the links are there to the site, everything else. Get more understanding of the concept, see how you might be able to get involved. You might be in those areas at the moment, and you've suddenly just heard of this for the first time. He's got the team that can help, that can reach out there, and he's got some wonderful partners in the process, which is tremendous. But listen, for your time today, for sharing your story, sharing the journey, sharing everything that you're doing with the organisation, Kush Rawal, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's show as much as I did. Remember, with the guests that you just saw, go into the show notes for the page because all of their links are there so that you can get in touch and to get more information. And talking about getting more information, more guests, more insights, more knowledge, etc., make sure you're subscribed. Get the subscription done, get the notifications on, and then we'll always keep in touch with you every single time a brand new show is going to come out. So thanks for tuning to This Week in Property.